light.
Hi everybody, welcome to today's session. This is the training and support webinar for the new approved provider list procurement. I'm here with colleagues from the North Yorkshire County Council today, running this webinar. I'm just going to leave it a couple of minutes just whilst we wait for everybody to join. Just to let you all know that today's session is being recorded. On the back of today's session, we will be sharing a recording of the session, which will be shared on email and across our social media pages, including LinkedIn and Facebook. So just a couple of minutes or so while we wait for everybody to join. I can see the numbers jumping up nicely, so it may not be too long. So we've got a decent number of attendees at this point in time, guys, so I'm going to get started. As I've just said for you, those of you who may have just joined, this is the webinar for the new approved provider list procurement. It's training and support from the North Yorkshire County Council team. I have just let people know that today's session is being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording on the back of today's session. You'll receive an email to the email address you registered for today's session with, and we will also push it out across Go for Growth social media. So I'm going to get started by introducing the team. I've already done our bit of housekeeping, just letting you know that it is going to be recorded. I myself will be monitoring the chat and Q&A functions. If you want to post any questions that you've got throughout in the chat function, we will have sections towards the end of each section. We'll give an opportunity to answer some questions, and then we'll have one larger Q&A time towards the end of today's session. So we're joined by Hannah, Stephen and Carl from North Yorkshire County Council today. Hannah dealing with service and development in the team, Stephen dealing with quality and service continuity, and Carl, who's the area finance administration manager. So I'm going to pass over to Hannah now, who will be leading us on to the next section. Any questions, as I did say, just pop those in the Q&A function. Hannah?
Yeah, so if you just pop me onto the next slide, I'll just give a bit of a brief summary of what we'll cover today as part of today's webinar. So firstly, just hello to everybody. It feels a bit alien because it feels like we're talking to us ourselves, but I can see that there's 51 of you on the call, which is great, and I can recognise some people's names on that attendee list as well, which is great. So hi, my name's Hannah. I'm one of the strategic service development managers in the service development team, and have been quite heavily involved in the re-procurement and now moving on to the implementation of the new approved provider list for adult social care. So just to tell you what we'll be covering today, we'll do a little bit of introduction. So I'll let Stephen and Carl introduce themselves in a second. I'm then going to walk you through sort of an overarching summary and introduction to the approved provider list, some of which many of you will have heard us talk about before. We ran various webinars throughout the procurement live period that gave various kind of detailed descriptions of the new features of the approved provider list. Some of that repetition here, but just an introduction really. We've then got Stephen Crutchley, who's going to talk you through all things contracts and contract management in relation to the new approved provider lists. I'm going to then come back in and cover payment terms, so what the new payment terms look like within the new approved provider list contract. Carl McMahon is then here with us from an operational processing of contracts and payments perspective, and then we'll finish off with a Q&A. What I did just want to touch on as part of this slide is what we won't cover today. So I'm conscious that some providers may have some outstanding payment and contract queries, or may have queries that relate to annual inflationary uplift or payment in advance more broadly. That's not within the scope of the webinar today. We will be sharing contact emails for various different teams within the council as part of today's webinar, and as Lauren's articulated, we'll be sharing this after today's session. So if there are specific queries relating to those items in particular, we'd encourage you to email those directly through to us and we'll pick those up, but we just won't have the time or space within this webinar to pick those up. Okay, thanks Lauren. If you just move me on to the next slide. Before I get into full swing, I'll just give Stephen and Carl the ability to introduce themselves. Stephen, do you want to go?
Yeah, hello everybody. Stephen Crutchley. I'm the Quality Assurance Manager within the Quality and Service Continuity team at North Yorkshire County Council. And I'll hand over to Cal.
Hi everyone, I'm Cal McMahon. I'm the Business Support Manager for the Area Finance Administration teams with North Yorkshire County Council.
Thanks, Stephen and Carl. So hopefully we're all fairly familiar faces to many of you on the call, but if we're not, you now can put a face to a name. So that's great. So just to give you a brief history of kind of how we've got here, really, and I'll just summarise this because much of this we've covered elsewhere in other webinars. So North Yorkshire County Council has now re-procured our approved provider list for adult social care. So we've got current approved provider lists in place. They've been in place for a number of years, and those contracts come to an end on the 31st of October. We've used all our permitted extensions of those approved provider lists, so there was a necessity as well as a sort of innovative ambition and transformation ambition to re-procure these provider lists. So that re-procurement has now been completed, although it does remain open for any providers who may still wish to apply. An approved provider list is a pre-approved list of providers that the council will then use to purchase the majority of our adult social care, and that's then commissioned by our brokerage team using their brokerage sourcing process. And we use these approved provider list for people who have had a Care Act assessment via our social care needs and have been determined to have eligible needs under the Care Act. So that sourcing process through the brokerage team uses a best value, best match process to identify suitable providers. We'll come on to that in more detail in the next slides. Thanks, Lauren. So why are we renewing? I've sort of touched on that really. The current contracts are coming to an end, but it has also given us an opportunity to review some of that contract documentation and to improve it for both the council and for providers, and also to improve better enable us to manage that quality of care within the service and better reflect the quality of care being delivered in the county as well, and also enable providers to resubmit their rates to make sure that we're paying a fair price for the care in North Yorkshire. Thanks, Lauren. Okay, so again, I'm just summarising here because there are other sort of webinars available that we've delivered in much more detail, but just to summarise what some of the key changes for providers are in terms of the new approved provider list contract. So we've redefined the service areas. We've now got 4 approved provider lists, the addition of a 4th list being that supported living approved provider list with its own specific service specification. We've rewritten all those 4 service specifications so they have a real enablement, re-ablement focus throughout, a real focus on promoting people's independence through the care and support that they're delivered. So really embedding that throughout, and also embedding throughout the service specifications that focus on technology enabled care and making sure we're maximising the digital solutions available to support people to remain as independent as possible. So there's some key kind of fundamental changes in the service specifications that you've hopefully seen when you've been engaging in this re-procurement. We've also included some additional elements within the re-procurement. So there is now a quality assessment as part of the application to make sure that we're assessing quality as part of that quality pathway from the outset. So you'll all of you on the call will be familiar with that, having completed those quality questions as part of your application. That's then going to be followed up with a quality conversation, and we've included that pricing evaluation as well. So we've some of you will be familiar with the price clarification process and will have been in touch with some of our teams as part of that. We've changed the costing models and payment terms, and I'll come on to that in more detail. And we've sought to standardise some things that that there's been some variance with across different services. So things like notice periods required from providers in terms of termination of packages, and also what we will pay in the event of people being absent from their service due to hospitalisation or other reasons. So we've sought to standardise some of that to create more equity within the market. We've included the ability for providers to apply to the approved provider list under the new VAT restructuring process, and Stephen's going to come on to the practicalities of that in more detail later on. We've also embedded some key changes around quality and how we will seek to drive up quality in the market, and also work with you to quality monitor our services in North Yorkshire. So we've developed a standards and outcomes framework, which is embedded with the NICE standards, and it's also linked in with the TLAC, Think Local Act Personal, making it real I and we statements as well. So that standards and outcomes framework applies across all of the services commissioned through these approved provider lists, and that standards and outcomes framework is mapped to and monitored by the quality pathway and PAMS, which Stephen will come on to later. Okay, thanks, Lauren. So again, just to summarise here, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, because what we did as part of the procurement live process is we did service specific webinars on each of these 4 areas. So we've now got 4 service specifications and 4 approved provider lists, and we've redefined and rescoped the lists slightly to how they are currently. So currently, if you're a current provider on our approved provider list, you'll know that we've got a list for domiciliary care and other regulated services. We've got one for residential and nursing care, and we've got one for non-regulated services. We've redefined and rescoped that. So under the new approved provider list, we've got 4 approved provider lists, each with its own detailed service specification. So we've got one approved provider list for home-based support. So that basically covers all of the services that are delivered in a person's home. So that's your regulated personal care, but it's also your non-regulated practical support services, regulated or non-regulated sitting services, and also living care as well. So where somebody has a person living in their home on a 24/7 period, that will fall under that home-based support service specification. Residential and nursing care, that's largely unchanged in terms of the type of services it covers, but what we have sought to do within that specification is to better describe the different types of short-term and long-term provision that we will commission under that list. So obviously we will commission long-term residential nursing and dual registered placements, as well as residential colleges, but we will also commission short-term provision, including respite, discharge to assess, and step-up provision through that approved provider list. We've then got the community-based support service specification and approved provider list, and that largely covers the services that would have previously been on the non-regulated approved provider list. But in essence, it's everything that's delivered outside a person's home. So all of the support that somebody receives out and about in the community, and that might be support out and about in the community to engage with more mainstream activities, or it might be more organised building-based services like our more sort of traditional day services. But that's the scope of that list, is everything that's delivered outside of a person's home, and for that reason those services are non-regulated. And then we've got the 4th list, which is a new list with its own brand new service specification, which covers supported living services with its own sort of definition there. And as I said previously, all of those service specifications have the standards and outcomes framework that applies across all of those lists. Thanks, Lauren. I'm probably going to just skip through these next few slides fairly quickly, but these slides just break down in a little bit more detail each of the 4 service areas. So under community-based support, we've got 4 different service types. So we've got employment skills services that are specifically working with a targeted group of people who have clearly identified employment outcomes. And these services are non-chargeable to the person, and for that reason they have a quite clear definition and scope that's really clearly defined within that service specification now. We've then got day opportunities, which are predominantly for those people that possibly not quite ready in terms of employment outcomes, but they really should seek to support people's progression and to increase their independence. And the types of things we expect those services to deliver is things like independent living skills, life skills, confidence building, all of those things. Then we have daycare, so we recognise that there is a group of people with perhaps more high and complex needs who may have some one-to-one and or personal care needs, and they may need a different type of service that is more therapy-led, that involves multi-sensory activities, that engages perhaps with health colleagues more closely, but we still want to see that sort of independence and promotion of independence throughout those daycare services as well. And then we've got the additional support service, which is where a person is attending a service but needs additional one-to-one, and that is by social worker assessment. Okay, Lauren. Okay, so I'm probably just going to skip over this slide slightly, but we have also, as part of the community-based support list, sought to define the level of need that a service will cater for. So at the moment, within the non-regulated APL, we don't really define that, and it can become quite difficult when we've got different people with different levels of need attending different services. So we have sought to sort of define really the level of service and level of need that you're able to deliver as a provider, and for you to be able to identify that as part of your application process. And obviously we don't expect, sort of stating the obvious really, but employment skills services would not be expected to deliver to people with high and complex needs, because those services are for people with quite clearly defined employment outcomes. And equally, daycare services, which should be tailored to delivering sort of multi-sensory activity that's therapy-led, would not necessarily cater for people with lower needs. So we've sought to sort of define that more clearly within the service specifications. Okay, thanks, Lauren. Okay, this just goes into more detail on the different types of residential and nursing care services that we will commission under that approved provider list. So as I said previously, we've got the different types of short-term provision that we would commission under this list, which would be planned and unplanned respite, discharge to assess services, so supporting somebody to have a smooth discharge from hospital for that 4-week period, and then thinking about step up and step down intermediate care services, so thinking about admission avoidance as well. And then that sort of more traditional longer term provision as well is also commissioned under this list. Thanks, Lauren. Again, some of this I've touched on already, but this just goes into more detail around the scope of the home-based support service specification. So looking at some of the key principles and changes to that delivery model. But the main change here is that this service specification covers everything that's delivered in a person's home, whether that service is regulated or unregulated, or non-regulated, sorry. And there's a real focus on those services increasing and or maintaining a person's level of independence in their own home. Thanks, Lauren. Okay, and then just lastly, the supported living service specification. There's a lot of words on this slide, but this is a brand new service specification that specifically describes the services that a person should expect to receive in a supported living setting, and how they may differ from those that are just sort of standard home-based support services. So specifically sort of strengthening expectations around how services support people to integrate into the community that the supported living setting is based within, looking at building people's strengths, skills and independence, helping people to live the lives they want, and building sort of relationships, and giving people a chance to live in a home of their own. So supported living could be a long-term solution for some people, but it actually could be a stepping stone to some people to live more independently or completely independently in some cases in their own homes. And we really want to set that ambition really within supported living services around maximising that independence. There are also some additional expectations in there for supported living providers around having service level agreements and management arrangements in place with housing providers, particularly in relation to the different roles and responsibilities of a housing provider, working very closely alongside the care and support provider, thinking about things like how the person is supported with housing related tasks and management of utilities, etc. So some quite specific expectations there around supported living providers that do differ from a more generic home-based support provider really. So we've just sought to clarify that within this specification. Thanks, Lauren. Okay, so the last bit that I just want to come on to, and this is probably hot off the press really in terms of information that providers will not have heard before. So what we have been sort of working towards as the start date for the new approved provider list is the 1st of November. So that's fast upon us, as you'll all be aware. So what we've been discussing over the sort of recent week or so really internally is whether we need to consider some transitional arrangements that allow us a little bit of extra time to make sure that we can onboard as many providers onto the new approved provider list as possible, but also enable us to continue to work with and commission packages of care with the full capacity of the care market as we approach winter. So we've been discussing internally some transitional arrangements to support that. And I know that many of you on the call have been sort of anxious about receiving confirmation of your onboarding and acceptance onto the new approved provider list. So these transitional arrangements are to support that sort of period of time really, and allow us that space during winter to continue commissioning packages of care. There are also some additional developments that we're working on internally to support our internal teams, but more importantly support providers as well in terms of how we process our contracts and payments. So there is some really exciting actually systems development work happening that is just not quite fully tested and ready to go. So we're giving ourselves a transitional period of time to introduce those system developments and allow us additional time to roll out that training to yourselves as providers. So I just wanted some space within this webinar today to talk about what those transitional arrangements will look like for yourselves as providers. And I'm aware there'll be a mixture of providers that fall into these different three categories on the call today. So at the moment, what we have is a group of providers who will know who they are, that have applied to the new approved provider list. They have had their application approved and they've received notification that they will be accepted onto the new approved provider list, which is great. So for those providers, you'll be issued with a new contract. So the contract that you've already seen via your tender, be issued with a new contract, and from the 1st of November for new packages of care that we commission with yourselves, you will be paid for your newly submitted rates. There is then a group of providers, some of you again may be on the call, that have applied to the approved provider list. You've submitted a fully complete application, but for some reason you've not yet been approved or accepted, and that may be may be due to some internal delays in terms of processing your application. There may be other reasons for that, but you've submitted a fully complete application, but you just have not yet been approved and accepted onto that new approved provider list. What we're putting in place for this group of providers is an extension almost of the current contract. It's strictly speaking, it's not an extension, it's a new contract that reflects the terms of the current contract. We can't extend again legally, so it has to be a new interim contractual arrangement that reflects the current arrangements. But you will receive, for packages of care from the 1st of November that we commission with you, new packages of care, you will be paid at your newly submitted rates, conditional on that approval and acceptance process happening within 3 months. And we're all, we'll work with you and commit with you to making that happen. There's then a third group of providers, and again, some of you may be on the call, have applied to the approved provider list, but there is something outstanding on that application. So that may be one of a number of things. It may be an insurance form, it may be a particular price that's missing for a particular service, but the application is incomplete at this stage, and therefore we can't progress with the approval and acceptance because we haven't received a complete application. For this group of providers, we will again use a new version of our current PPA, but we will have to commission any new packages of care from the 1st of November at the current rates. We won't be able to pay at the newly submitted rates. So this may take some digesting. If there are questions, we'll take as many as we can, but we may need to divert some to the FAQs. But if we just move to the next slide, Lauren, I think I've pretty much... Okay, so the next thing that we're introducing as part of these transitional arrangements, and what I must just caveat is that these aren't ongoing, endless transitional arrangements. We'll seek to phase these out in January 2023 at the latest. But as I mentioned, we're working on some exciting new systems development. So we're developing some new systems internally that will really support us with the processing of contracts and payments. But these need to be fully tested and they won't be ready to use until January 2023. And therefore, for an interim period of time, we're going to continue as is. So I'm not sure how many providers on the call are existing providers with whom we currently work. If you're an existing provider with whom the council currently works and currently commissions packages of care, our current processes for contracts and payments will remain as is. So you shouldn't see any different. What we will introduce come January is a more automated process that should be more seamless and accessible for providers. But we recognise that we just need a bit more time to test that new system, and we'll roll out some more detailed training in the months to come. What that does mean is that the new payment terms that you've seen in the new contract via your tender, specifically the ones that relate to hospitalisation and absence, they will now be introduced at a later date. So they will now be introduced in line with the new systems development, which we hope will go live in January 2023. So I realise that the last two slides are brand new information. Lauren, I'm not sure if there's any questions either that relate to the previous slides about the sort of overarching introduction or that relate more specifically to that new information.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions just to run through. The first one I think I can answer quite easily enough. It's just whether slides and notes will be shared on the back of the session, which I'll share along with the recording. I've got a question which I think you have just covered, but I'll just run it by you just in case you want to elaborate any further. So there's a question saying we haven't received notification of approval onto the APL. Could you advise when we will get this, please? I do think you did just cover that in your last couple of slides.
Yeah, so I can see that question, Julie, and I guess I wouldn't invite kind of an open dialogue on this call about it, but it almost depends which group of providers you fall into and whether we've received a full and complete application. In which case we'll be working on those and getting the acceptances and approvals out as soon as possible. If there are delays at our end that are causing you know, causing that, and we then you will fall into group 2, and we will commission with you at your new rates. If you're in the group of providers where we've got an incomplete application, then it's difficult to say, because we'd need to follow up on what is outstanding. What we've committed to do following today's session is to identify which providers fall into which group, so we can communicate that with yourselves. But I'm happy if you want to send an email to one of the contact emails, Julie, so we can follow up your application specifically. That's absolutely fine.
Next question then from Gemma is, can you confirm if the transitional actions for applied or complete application but not heard outcome are also applicable for non-existing providers?
Yes.
Brilliant. And again, similar to the last question, so when will we know what our application status is? What is the cut-off for knowing you are in the first group? And therefore, if that date has passed and you haven't been informed of any issues with your application, that you are in the not approved or accepted group?
Sorry, I'm just rereading the...
No problem.
So I think we'll do that piece of work as quickly as possible and hope to get something out either this week or early next week to confirm which group providers are in. If you're in either group 1 or group 2, in essence, we will be commissioning packages of care with you at the newly submitted rates, and there should be a seamless transition between moving from group 2 to group 1, if that makes sense, in terms of the issuing of the interim contract versus the issuing of the new contract. But we'll seek to get that information out as soon as possible. The questions are scared now, so hopefully I answered that. But
I think you did, yeah. Just another couple of quick ones. So if the contracts are finishing as of 31st of October as stated, why are existing contracts not moving on to new payment structure from November? We have already been approved.
okay, so I think that's the discussion around existing legacy packages of care, and I think we have touched on that sort of loosely in previous webinars. There is conversations and discussions happening within the council around the impact of legacy packages, and I think as a council we hear loud and clear and we recognise the challenges of that, but at the moment the decision in relation to the implementation of these approved provider lists is that for existing packages of care they will move on to the new contract at the point of a review and reassessment and a change in needs. So that's the decision as it stands, but we do recognise the challenges of legacy packages of care, and there are ongoing discussions around that.
Thank you. And last one is just, if you have not been approved but advised to resubmit your questions, what group do you fall into?
I'd probably need to look into what specific questions that refers to, because I'm not sure whether that refers to an incomplete application, in which case it'd be group 3, or whether it's referring to, I probably need to pick that one up as a direct query, if that's all right, Laura.
I'll leave that one unanswered then, and I can pop it through on an email to
Thanks, Laura, that'd be helpful.
Are you happy for me to move forward back onto slides?
Yes, please, thank you. I think I'm handing over to Stephen. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to cover the contractual changes and also any of the changes within the quality service or the quality pathway. So if we could move on, please, Lauren. Thank you. So for those that may have already been to other webinars in relation to the quality pathway, so we are introducing a new quality monitoring process within the quality service continuity team, which is the quality pathway. So obviously from a point of view of providers, obviously the responsibility lies with yourselves as providers, but from a Care Act point of view, we still have, as a local authority, we still have responsibility for assessing the quality of provision within North Yorkshire, and we'll be doing that through the quality pathway, which is for all adult social care provision in the county. So it's a supportive process for those that are aware. We have our quality assurance officers, and we also have our quality improvement team. So there will be support and guidance available through those two teams. And if you do fall into a category where you fall below the standards expected, then there is a level of support from our quality improvement team and quality assurance officers. Some of you may already be aware who your quality assurance officer is, and you may have had support from a quality improvement officer. So those processes will continue into the new quality pathway. And I think, as some people have mentioned, the quality pathway starts through the procurement process and through an application onto the provider list, and you are asked a series of quality questions, which are the scored process and fall part of the procurement. And then once you are approved, you then move into the quality pathway, and the first step of the quality pathway is a quality conversation. So some of you may already have had the quality conversation. So the staff member from the council's quality service continuity team, which is where I work. So at the minute it is a telephone call. It's not a face-to-face meeting. We're doing them through Teams. I'll say telephone call. It's through Teams, and we have a document called a quality conversation that we use to discuss the current pathway and the service delivery from yourselves as a care provider. Depending on what type of services deliver, does depend on the types of questions that you are asked, because there are different questions depending on which service you are delivering. And the purpose of the quality conversation is so that we as a team can gauge a level of risk within the service, and obviously the good practice and good care that is being delivered across North Yorkshire. But also it helps us to understand where there are any providers that do need some additional support to meet the standards and the standards and the contractual standards within the agreement. So the idea is that by having this quality conversation at the beginning of your journey through the pathway, we can provide that support at the first step to make sure that the people that you are supporting are safe, and that also if there's any areas of support that you require from ourselves as the quality service continuity team, we can provide that support at the earliest opportunity. If there are high risk providers that we are working with, and I'll come on to the levels of risk in a second, but then we may choose to follow the suspension process. But that again, I've got some slides on the suspension process as well. So the support through the quality pathway, so we have 3 levels of risk. So we've got level 1, which is low risk. So there's, if you can see that, then there's a level, it gives you the interventions that you may receive from ourselves as a team. So you may just get some advice and guidance and signposting and tools and guidance just to help you as a provider who have been identified as being as low risk. So you don't need any more support from ourselves, whether that be a quality assurance officer or quality improvement team. Then there are those providers that fall into level 2 who are classed as medium risk. So that's you may have multiple low level risks, which could lead to a deterioration in quality and poorer outcomes for people. So you would get support from quality assurance officer or quality improvement team or a quality nurse, because we do have some nurses on the team now, because we're in the middle of a pilot with our local integrated care board. So we do have some nurses that are working within the team. So that intervention could be a quality visit or a validation visit through the PAMS process, which I'll come on to PAMS a little bit in a little while. We'll offer you some advice, guidance and tools and materials. We may do some observations and case tracking with you as a provider to support you to ensure that you're meeting people's needs safely. We'd have there would be a production of an improvement plan, which we'd be able to support you with and through. For those that have had a baseline assessment visit previously, which is our current process of measuring quality, then obviously when you get a summary form from and a scoring tool from a point of view of the baseline, then there is a section for actions and recommendations. So the improvement plan is very similar to what you will have experienced before. And then we have the high risk providers, so they're level 3, where the provider is at risk of exiting the market due to poor outcomes, and obviously people's needs are not being met. Then there will be more intensive work undertaken by the quality improvement officers. Similar to level 2, there are similar work that we would do to support you, but it may be more in depth. So there could be actual learning sets, there'd be more observations, there'd be interventions demonstrating the quality of service, and we would do some more supportive work and in relation to the areas of risk. Thank you, Lauren. There's a lot going on this slide, but obviously you'll be able to have a look at it. But this kind of gives an indication of the pathway through the quality pathway and your planned journey as a provider. So the blue sections are your application through an acceptance onto the provider list, and then the green is your annual cycle. So we may ask for an annual self-assessment via the PAM system, and then we may do some validation work and some supportive work with you to ensure that standards are being met. If standards aren't being met, then you may fall into the yellow section, which is support and an intervention, whether, as I've said, whether that be low level, medium level, or high. And then we've got the section at the bottom, which is the purple section, which will be something that we're looking to introduce later on through the pathway, which is a pathway to outstanding. So we're looking at supporting those providers who may be rated good that wish to aim for outstanding ratings within CQC. So there will be further work that we would do with those providers, but that's something that we'll be looking to introduce later on through the pathway. It's not up and running yet. Next slide. And as Hannah's mentioned previously, so within the current agreement and sort of number of the documents, so we have a standards and outcomes framework, which is based on the 5 domains that you can see below, and within those are 16 individual sections. So the standards and outcomes framework does form part of the agreement. So as a provider that's been approved onto the provider list, you have agreed to work towards the standards and outcomes, and that you should be meeting those standards and outcomes. If you're not, then that's where the support from ourselves would come in to assist you to ensure that you were able to meet these 16 sections and the 5 domains. And the standards and outcomes framework, again, it's a document that you will have had through the procurement process. However, if it's a document that you still need, then we can share an update, share a version with you. You just need, if you email us, and our contact details will be available later on, so we'll be able to share the standards and outcomes framework with you if you haven't seen it, but it is available within the procurement documents. Next slide. And as I've mentioned, the standards and outcomes framework, so it links into the PAMS assessment and standards. So from a point of view of PAMS, that's the system that we will be using to measure the provider's quality. So the standards and outcomes framework dovetails your PAMS assessment. So if we do a PAMS assessment, or you do your own self-assessment, and it comes out as good or excellent, then obviously you are, as a result, you are meeting the standards and outcomes framework. If your self-assessment or our assessment through the PAMS system comes out as poor or requires improvement, then there are obviously areas of work that needs to be done to ensure that you as a provider can meet the standards and outcomes framework, and that's what we will be doing to measure your compliance with those standards, and we will be able to assist you to ensure that you can meet those standards, which in turn means that you are meeting people's needs. Thanks, Lauren. Also within the new documentation is a sustainability policy and procedure for those providers that may not know what the sustainability policy is. So it's a mechanism for providers to apply for sustainability funding. Now, that means that the funding goes through a full procedure and process, and we do require some quite detailed financial information from you as a provider if you are interested or feel that you require some long-term sustainability funding, so it's properly awarded, managed and controlled. We are clear and transparent when we have a provider who's applying for funding. So there is a process that we will follow. You will get a copy of that process so you can see the steps involved in applying through the sustainability process. It promotes the sustainability of the providers within the care market. We want good quality care to be delivered by yourselves as a provider of North Yorkshire. And if you are struggling financially, then we're offering the sustainability process to assist those providers to remain within the care market. As I've said, it is around us supporting you and looking at the long-term strategic outcomes within North Yorkshire, and making sure, as I've said, that we've got good quality providers within the market that are sustainable. Next slide, please, Lauren. Thank you. So in terms of meeting the eligibility, there is some very clear criteria for if a provider is thinking that they need to apply through the sustainability process. So it's got to be the last resort. You've as an organisation, you've explored all the avenues and there's no other financial assistance available to you, then, and it's if you don't receive any support from us, then it's a potential market failure. Then, you in the first step, you would probably beat the criteria within the sustainability policy. As I've said, we need financial evidence that you are in financial difficulty and that financial difficulty was unforeseen. So it's something that you weren't aware of or prepared for. And it's, again, the service that you are delivering needs to be aligned with our strategic needs of the council's commission services within North Yorkshire. So it's something that's available for providers. If you feel that you feel you meet those criteria and it's something that you would feel that you need to have further information on, then the policy procedure is available within the procurement documents. So you've already had it. However, if you wish to start going through the process, then you can contact ourselves through the contact details that we'll share once we've gone through today's webinar, and we can make contact with you and discuss the process. Some of you may have heard of the hardship process, which is something that we've had in place previously, and the sustainability policy and procedure has superseded the hardship process. So sustainability is our new way of supporting the care market financially. So it's in place already, but it forms part of the new agreement and is an attachment to the contract. So you have all of the documentation to be able to follow that and go through that process. But any queries, then we are more than happy to support you with any applications. Thanks, Lauren. And then there's quite a lot of information on this slide, but this is a suspension process. We already have a suspension process that's contained within the current PPA, the current pre-purchase agreement. So there already is a suspension process. It's been updated. So the suspension process that is contained within the new agreement is an updated version that matches the PAMS process and the quality pathway. So there's quite a lot of information on that slide in relation to the process itself and how it works. But again, all of the information is contained within the suspension process. If a provider's got some queries in relation to suspension, if maybe you're currently in a suspension and you've got some queries, then you can contact us. I'm not suggesting that we would have a conversation in this public arena, but if you've got some queries, we can obviously help you with that. But the suspension process still sits within the quality and service continuity team. So it's still something that we would currently support a provider with. And there is a change in relation to how suspensions are agreed. There will be a quality and market support review board which will review suspensions rather than the current process of it going through an assistant director, so that there's more involvement with a suspension through the new process. Next slide, please, Lauren. Thank you. So as it says there, so suspension of a service is seen by Health and Adult Services, so has as the last resort, and even when a suspension is implemented, apart from the most serious circumstances, we want to continue to support a provider. So it isn't a case of, that there may be a situation and we've had to suspend you as a provider from the current list or the new list when we start in November. That doesn't mean that we're going to stop working with you. It just means the suspension means that we're not going to give you any new packages, and we would want to continue to support you. And as it says there, apart from the most serious of circumstances, we would still want to work with you. There are occasions where people have to move, where a service does close, but they are few and far between. On the whole, we would support you and work with you to improve, to ensure that you could meet terms of your contract. And that's where the improvement plan would come in, where we would use that document. It's a live document where we would support you to meet your improvements, record your actions, and that's where the quality improvement officers or the quality assurance officer within our team would help you to meet those timescales and work towards having your suspension lifted, which is ultimately what we want, is to support you as a provider to improve. So that from a point of view of the suspension process, as I've said, it's still something that we currently have within our current agreement, but it has been updated to make reference to PAMS and how the PAMS and the quality pathway will work. So there is a new suspension process for the new agreement. So you've already had that document, but I would suggest you have a look at it and make yourself aware of the circumstances of when we may, as a local authority, make the decision to suspend you from the current and the new provider list. Thanks, Lauren. And this is something new that has come in as a result of the changes, and within some organisations and some care providers are asking local authorities to charge VAT, value-added tax. So what we've done is we've included some additional clauses within the new agreement, which gives us and providers the ability to review the current agreement and enter into a subsequent direct agreement that gives you as an organisation the ability to charge the local authority VAT. As you can see, the clause there is the new clause within the agreement. There are a number of processes to follow before we will agree to an organisation entering into a direct agreement in relation to an alternative VAT structure. But we have introduced the new clause so that you have the ability to do that with our agreement. There was no ability within the current PPA, pre-placement agreement, for those providers that are already on the current list. There was no ability for you as a provider to alter the VAT structure within your organisation to ensure that you could then charge the local authority VAT. So we've listened to providers who have raised that as a concern, and we've introduced the new VAT clause within the agreement to allow us to have the potential to introduce an alternative agreement which includes a VAT structure. Next slide, please, Lauren. So I suppose the purpose of the direct agreement, which is the new agreement if an organisation is wanting to charge us as a local authority VAT, is we would create a three-way contract. So that replaces the agreement that you would enter into with a local authority, and we would enter into a three-way contract, which gives you the opportunity to have a third-party company take up the rights and obligations of the original party. So what that means is that there would be ourselves as a local authority, there would be a provider company, and there would be a contract company. So prior to the local authority agreeing to this three-way contract, then we are entitled to carry out due diligence, and we would require evidence from you as an organisation that you have followed the correct processes, which includes correspondence with CQC, so Care Quality Commission, if you are a regulated provider, as we require evidence that CQC are in agreement with this change, and also HMRC. There has to be a dialogue with and agreement from HMRC that you as an organisation meet the correct terms to be able to charge ourselves VAT. Now, as a provider, it is your responsibility to ensure that you have that evidence before coming to us as a local authority to request an alternative agreement. And as part of that, as I've said, we would then do our own due diligence, which may be a financial due diligence, and we may also ask for evidence of why the decision has been taken to alter your company structure. And we also, it's a local authority decision, so it's our decision whether to novate the contract to enable this structure. So we need to be aware of all of the reasons as to why you're choosing to go down this route, and ultimately it has to be for the benefit of the people in receipt of service. As it says there, the final paragraph, so we do reserve the right to claim our reasonable costs and expenses, including any legal costs and or accountancy costs or other professional advisory fees incurred in respect of assessing whether to agree to the alternative structure. So it's just about the local authority being able to claim its costs. If we have a lot of providers that make the decision to choose this route, then there's quite a lot of work involved in administrative duties and accountancy, as it says there, legal costs and other costs. And we should be able to claim those costs as a result of an organisation requesting an alternative agreement structure due to VAT. So we haven't put a cost, so there's no specific cost of how much, because purely at this current time we don't know how much of our reasonable costs is going to be, because we haven't gone through this process with a provider. That's why we haven't said how much. However, it does say there in the clause that it has to be reasonable. So it will be reasonable costs that we have incurred as a local authority. Thanks, Lauren. And then, so as we've said, so it's an alternative structure. So that will be, it's a structure adopted by the provider to secure taxation efficiencies. So in particular in this example, so it would be VAT, whereby the council contracts with the provider in its capacity as a contract company, and then the contract company enters into a subcontract with the provider company to deliver the services, and that's where we get the three-way agreement. So us as a local authority, the contract company, and the provider company. So I've just given some definitions there of what a contract company is. So the contract company is the provider that we have is in its capacity as contract company. So it's the contract management company for the purposes of managing their subcontract, and then you subcontract the service to the provider company. It took me a while to get around who's who, who's the contract company, who's the provider company. As I've said, it's not something that we've done before. However, if it's something that you as an organisation feel it's something that you wish to pursue, then we would obviously advise you to get independent legal advice prior to you going down this route to ensure that you understood the risks of going down an agreement and a VAT structure. And then you would obviously then be able to have conversations with ourselves in relation to what due diligence we would want to do before we went down the route of agreeing to an alternative contractual structure. Thanks, Lauren. Next slide. Thank you. Really quickly, continue with an overview of the new documents. So within the current agreement, we have listed and included the brokerage process. That wasn't a previous attachment to our agreement. So please take your time to have a look at the brokerage process. For those providers that have worked with us for a while, you think you may know the brokerage process and understand it. However, we have published it, and it is part and forms part of the agreement. So I would suggest you have a look, and if there are any queries as to why we do what we do, then hopefully it should cover it within the process. But if you've got any further queries, then you can obviously come back to us. But the idea of us sharing the process is that you as a provider can see how we commission packages, and you can see that it's a fair, consistent and transparent approach. So as Hannah, I think, touched on earlier, the packages are brokered on a best value, best match model. So what that means in practice is that brokerage assess the lowest costed support package placement available at the time of sourcing that can safely meet the person's needs. And obviously that is subject to a person's choice, but within the brokerage process, it covers why we do that and how we do it. So if it's something that you've got a query around, then you should be able to get your answer from the brokerage process. Thanks, Lauren. And then the difference between the contract management and quality assurance. So how do we manage our contracts? So contract management currently does sit with the quality and service continuity team. So we can offer contractual support, and the quality assurance also sits with the quality and service continuity team, which includes PAMs and the quality assurance officers, the quality improvement officers, and the pathway and the quality conversations. So it's two distinct paths that we are separating out. So there will be, contract management and quality assurance. Yes, both of those do sit with ourselves as a team, but we will be looking to separate out the contract management into an alternative structure. But currently it still sits within our team, and we work very closely with colleagues within health and adult services, so service development, care and support, finance teams, and we've got a range of partnerships with statutory and non-statutory bodies. So we work very closely with health, and we support the work of health and adult services through the quality assurance work that we do. The idea of the pathway, of the quality pathways and the provider risk profiles, is that we can then direct resource to where it's needed most. So this focuses the collaborative approach to supporting yourselves as a provider, and the idea of the pathways that we can build better relationships with yourselves, the people who use your services, and their families. So that's the reason we've gone down a quality pathway route, and you will then have support through the quality service continuity team, through quality assurance and contract management. Next slide, please, Lauren. So as we said, so we will work closely with the contract management team, and that at the minute is ourselves. So we will work closely with ourselves, but once the contract management team is separate, then it will be two separate teams supporting you as a provider. But the idea is that we will share information to ensure that we're working well together, and that there's obviously a good joint working relationship, so that we can both support you as a provider. And if there are any contractual issues that may arise, then there would be a conversation with the quality and service continuity team, so that we can support you as a provider if you do require support. And if there are any areas of concern within the quality pathway, then that may require contract management input. So we would share that information to ensure that everybody was aware of any issues that needed to be covered. The idea of the contract management team is that they will be able to support you with sustainability process, any fees, contract variations, inflation changes, any grants. So that work would be overseen by the contract management team. Similarly, contract defaults, suspensions, any other contract compliance work would sit with the contract management team, and as I've said, and then the last point there, so contractor and contract innovations. So currently they are still within us as a quality and service continuity team. So we're still covering those pieces of work, but eventually there will be a separate contract management team who will pick up those pieces of work, which means that us as a quality team can concentrate on supporting providers through the quality pathway. Next slide, thanks, Lauren. And that just basically just covers the two differences and how we will share information together through both teams. So next slide. And quickly, so a new piece of support that we've brought into the agreement is an annual contract review. Now that will sit with the contract management team. How that will work moving forward, we haven't yet agreed because there isn't a contract management team in place yet. But it gives the authorised officer of the council and the contract manager, so that's your representative, the ability to meet annually to review the agreement. Gives us the ability to review your performance and also any changes. So if you have a particular concern or any issues that you wanted to raise, you can do that at any point, obviously, but it gives you as a provider, I suppose, an annual point of contact to be able to raise any concerns or any issues that you feel you need to. So we can have additional meetings and we can have additional contact, but this is something that we have built into the new agreement so that we have the ability to have those conversations. Obviously, we have quite a lot of providers in North Yorkshire, so how we manage that is something that still has to be agreed. But we're looking to have more contact with you as a provider, and obviously we would support service development because you have lots of contact with the service development team, and between our two teams, we would be able to support you, and we would expect our service development colleagues to feed into any annual review as well. So that's something new that we brought into the new agreement, and we will be looking to set up those meetings from next year onwards. Thanks, Lauren. And then PAMS, I'm gonna hopefully skip through PAMS quite quickly. Because these, if you were at the Care Connected session last week, these are the same set of slides. So the PAMS is the Provider Assessment Market Management Solution, and that is the web-based solution that we will be using to monitor providers. So it's fully automated, and as I've said, it links into the standards and outcomes framework, and you as a provider are able to use PAMS to self-assess yourself. So you can do your own self-assessments. So that helps you to identify where you are meeting or potentially not meeting the terms of the contract and any quality concerns that may arise from your provision. So that gives you the ability to do that yourself. And we as a team will use PAMS to measure the quality of service being delivered. Next slide, please, Lauren. So that kind of gives you some more detail in relation to PAMS, but as I've said, this is something that we've already gone through. So if we could flip on to the next slide, please, Lauren. And again, standards and outcomes. So we've already covered the standards and outcomes. So that then that slide there shows you the triangulation between the two types. Of domains and assessments, and then this slide gives you the format of our visits. So gives you as I've said, so there's the provider's self-assessment, so you can do your own. We may choose to visit and do our own quality visit within your service using the PAMS system, which for those providers that may have worked with us for a while, that's the old baseline assessment visit that we currently use. And then a validation visit. If you have completed a self-assessment and submitted that self-assessment to us as a team, we then may choose to visit and do a validation visit to just make sure that the assessment accurately reflects the service being delivered. And then if you do require support from us, whether that be a quality assurance officer or a quality improvement officer, then that would be an intervention visit. So we use those visits to support you as a provider. So there's 4 distinct types of visit well, 3 distinct types of visit and a self-assessment that you as an organisation are able to complete yourselves. Next slide, please, Lauren. So the provider returns. So within PAMS, there's the ability for you to submit returns, which will give us key performance information. But that's not currently up and running. It will be up and running next year. So that's something that we will be looking to bring in, but it's not currently something that we are doing, but it's future. So in the future, we will maybe using PAMS to ask for pieces of information from you as a provider. Next slide, please, Lauren. And then PAMS landscape. So as it says there, PAMS has the ability to bring together a range of data sets, so that gives us lots of information, and it's across all of the region. So 14 local authorities across the region have signed up to PAMS. So we will be able to, through PAMS and data sharing agreements, we'll be able to share relevant information, not personal information, but it's information in relation to services that are being delivered and the ratings that other local authorities have given providers in other areas. So we may be working with a provider that's based in Leeds, and Leeds may have done a visit to that provider, and then they will be able to provide that not detailed information, but an oversight of the visit to that provider and give us an indication of the quality of that service that's being delivered. So it gives the local authorities the ability to work more closely together through PAMS landscape. But again, that will be something that will be up and running when all of the other local authorities are using PAMS. Next slide, please, Lauren. And then there's just some contact details. So if you've got any queries, as I've said, so the contract management team, so it's out for those that have been around and worked with us for quite a while. It's our usual email address, so socialservices.contractingunit@northyorks.gov.uk. There's the service development email address, and the quality team will have a separate email address, but that's not currently up and running. But once PAMS and the quality pathway are fully embedded, then there will be a separation of contract management and quality assurance, and there'll be a separate email for the quality team. And obviously we'll share that with everybody once the pathway is fully embedded. Thanks, Lauren. I think that's me. So is it Carl, or is it you, Hannah?
I think it's me next.
Oh, sorry.
No, I think it's me next, but I just wanted to check if there's any questions.
There is a few questions.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot about questions.
No problem. I'll just pop over a few of those then. There was a couple of questions that had come in after we'd finished the last Q&A for Hannah. So do you want me to leave those to the end or email those over to you?
I have answered a couple of them, Lauren, just as Stephen was chatting, because there's a couple of, I sense there's, which is completely understandable. I sense that there's a lot of providers on the call that are wanting to understand which of those groups within the transitional arrangements that they fall into, and whether they've got, if you've got an incomplete application, I'm hoping you should know about it, because we'll be badgering you for whatever is outstanding. But I'm conscious that I think there's just some anxiety around if you're in that group 2 category. So we'll seek to get that clarity out to providers as soon as possible. The evaluation panel are kind of actively working on approvals and notifications as we speak. So notification letters will be going out sort of daily, really, as the evaluation panel progress through those applications. So the list will be almost a moment in time, but hopefully if we get that out as soon as possible, it will sort of answer some of those questions. But yeah, I did answer a few just as we were going along.
Perfect. Well, next question then would be, so for non-regulated care and practical support, can a provider receive outstanding by North Yorkshire County Council, or can that only be granted by the CQC for regulated care activity?
Sorry, Lauren, in relation to...
In relation to practical, so for non-regulated care and then practical support.
From a non-regulated practical support point of view, if you were applying to deliver that service, then it's obviously that's something that is non-personal care in the person's own home. So it could be a sitting service where there's no personal care involved, or it could be more household support, but there is no personal care involved, which is why it sits within the home-based support service specification. Hannah, if there's anything else you wanted to cover.
Yeah, and you might just want to correct me here, Stephen, but my interpretation of that question is around how we as a council will quality assess non-regulated services, and whether we will band them as whether we will use those same bandings as CQC. Obviously, a non-regulated service will never be outstanding with CQC because they don't undertake that regulation, but we will be applying the standards and outcomes framework across all of our services. So I think the question is whether we will apply that banding or whether we will monitor in a different way for non-regulated services.
All providers that will go through the quality pathway.
Yeah.
And the quality conversation is tapered dependent on the type of service being delivered. So if it is a non-regulated service and you get asked slightly different questions, so from a point of view of the conversation, it's not a regulated, some of the questions relate to CQC regulated services, and if you're non-regulated, we may still ask you the regulated questions because they're pertinent to your service, because you should still be able to answer them, but there will be other questions that we wouldn't answer you. You'd still go through the pathway, you'd still be able to use PAMS, and we would remove those regulated type questions that don't apply to you as a provider. So there is a slight tweak to providers that are non-regulated going through the pathway, but on the whole, you're delivering services to vulnerable people, therefore you should be able to work through the pathway quite similarly to somebody that's regulated. It's just dependent on the type of service that you're delivering, really.
Thank you. So next one is hello, thank you. It's the quality questions. We received feedback and advised that we can resubmit. If we resubmit, how long would it be until we find out if we would then be approved? I know that's been covered slightly.
If from a point of view of the quality questions, how quickly you will get an outcome is how quickly we will get to your submission, I'm afraid. If you've resubmitted the quality questions, then they would be reviewed as part of the application. So how quickly, we'll get to them as quickly as we can. There's not really a time scale that I can provide, I'm afraid. So yeah, I'm just as quickly as we can, which I know isn't very helpful, but that's the best I can give, I'm afraid.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, is the VAT registration compulsory for all providers?
No, it's just something that if a provider is interested and it's something that they want to do, then they are able to do, but it is not a requirement in any way, shape or form. We've brought it in because a number of providers were asking if they could, because you can charge VAT in certain circumstances. So it's not a requirement. It's provider choice.
Thank you. Next is asking whether could we have a copy of the brokerage process, as presently contracts are being changed before we have accepted the changes, which can include wrong hours or wrong rates.
The brokerage process is already, it's part of the procurement documents, so you should already have it when you applied. However, if you are struggling, if you email our team, so the social services.contracting unit email address, we'll be able to send you a copy. But if you've got queries in relation to the contracts that are being issued, then you can obviously email the brokerage teams direct. They've all got their own email addresses, or you can come to us at the social services, and we can see if we can help if you're still struggling. But yeah, there's ways of you of being able to contact the brokerage team to be able to have a look at those queries that you've got. But we can share the brokerage process if you haven't got a copy. That's not a problem.
Brilliant, thank you. So could you please confirm when you expect PAMS and your quality team changes to be in place?
That's a good question. It's probably going to be we're looking at the beginning of next year, really, when we fully implement PAMS, and when we'll have probably a fully up and running quality and service continuity team that isn't doing the contract management. So it'll probably be the beginning of next year.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to go to one more question, then I'd say come to the other couple at the end because they're quite vague, or Hannah, if you want to type the answers, whichever works best. But the next one is volume 4, price 1.14. We are expected to hold a room for a resident should they be admitted to hospital for up to 12 weeks and 5 of those weeks at 50% of our rate. This is very worrying for small homes. Is there any comment on this?
So I would probably say that it's not within the scope of this webinar to debate the contract terms. We have done some work around average length of stay for residents within care homes to feed into these contract terms. So I want to offer some assurances there, and also offer sort of an invitation really for that provider to discuss any sustainability concerns with us. I don't know if you want to comment further, Stephen, but I probably think it's beyond the scope of this webinar to get into the detail of the contract term.
Yeah, but I would just reiterate what you've said, Hannah. Yeah, if you're concerned or you're worried, then come and talk to us, whether that be the service development team or whether it be the quality service continuity team, because we work closely together, and we'll be we can have some conversations with you outside of this webinar if you've got concerns.
Brilliant. Do you want to do questions now until the end and come back to a couple of those that are left at the end, or answer them as we go?
I'm just having a look whether I'll answer them as we go along if you like, Lauren. I'm just conscious of time.
Yeah, no, me too. That's perfect. Brilliant. I'll on to the next slide then.
Yeah, and I'm probably going to skim over some of this, but happy to take questions because some of this has been covered in quite a lot of detail during the procurement period. So this slide just summarises what the new costing models are, but hopefully many people on the call today will be very familiar with this, because I'm assuming that the majority of providers on the call have applied to the new approved provider list. So you've applied on the basis of these new costing models, but we have applied some parameters and guidelines in relation to price within this reprocurement. We do have a statutory responsibility under the Care Act as a local authority to have an oversight of care market and care market sustainability and costs within the market as well. So we've built some parameters within there as part of this reprocurement. So just to really summarise the headlines, really, residential and nursing care, obviously as a local authority, we have undertaken an actual cost of care exercise for residential and nursing care, specifically focusing on residential and nursing care for over 65s. We've sought to start to implement this through our current contracts, and we're sort of furthering that implementation really through the reprocurement of the approved provider list. So we've asked providers to define within their submission whether they accept or not our actual cost of care. The actual cost of care and any other weekly rate submitted as part of this reprocurement is for a defined set of direct care hours within any week. So it's a quite clearly defined rate for a set amount of care, which is very different to how we've commissioned residential and nursing placements previously. We've also asked providers to submit a set additional one-to-one rate within this reprocurement, which again is something new. For supported living and home-based support, very similar to how we currently work, really, in that providers have submitted an hourly rate as part of their submission. We did provide some guideline figures in relation to our current locality average and county-wide rates as part of the procurement documentation, and where providers fell outside 10% of those rates, we've had additional conversations with providers, which have actually proved to be really helpful to understand as a local authority where provider costs vary and what the rationale behind that is. So that's been really helpful. And then community-based support, again, some fairly significant changes there around costing model, whereby we have asked providers to submit hourly rates for those services, so more akin to home-based support and supported living services rather than those sessional rates, though providers have been able to submit where they are required to deliver a minimum number of hours, or a person is required to access a minimum number of hours of support within those services. So just some headline changes there, really, but I'm probably not going to kind of focus on that too much. Again, the next slide I'm going to skim over to some degree. This has been covered at previous webinars, but it is the new payment terms that I've just earlier on in the webinar, I've just explained that these new payment terms in relation to hospitalisation and absence will be introduced in line with the new systems developments that will support more efficient contracting and processing of our payments. So these, again, are quite clearly laid out within the contract and procurement documentation, but what we've sought to do is standardise this across services, where we haven't done that previously. So we're quite clear in what we will pay for and for how long. Again, just going back to that previous point, if that creates concern for you as a small provider, then by all means get in touch with us. But I am probably just going to skim over that slide because it's quite detailed within the available documents people have. And then the other bit I just wanted to touch on here, and again, this is literally a direct lift from a clause within the new contract, so hopefully everybody is familiar with it, but it's just to ensure that really that as part of the new contract, where a provider is admitted onto lists 1, 3 and 4 and is approached to deliver services for an individual direct payment recipient, it is expected that the provider agrees to use the rates that are accepted on the approved provider list. So hopefully that doesn't come as a surprise. We do apply that to some of our services now, but this will now apply across all lists except for residential and nursing. So it's just to clarify that point, really. But again, this is a direct clause lift from the contract that's readily available on your tender. So I think I'm handing over to Stephen now, Stephen and Carl, to talk about sort of processing and how that works. Unless there's any questions on those few slides. Sorry, Lauren, keep forgetting the questions. You're on mute.
My bad, sorry. I don't think there's any particular to what we've just covered, so we'll move on.
That's great. I'll have a look at some while Stephen and Carl are working.
Yeah, so I was just going to cover, there's a couple of slides and then I'll hand it to Carl. So it's just around the brokerage process, and as we've already covered, best value, best match. So that's whereby brokerage assess the approved provider rate data and we source based on the lowest costed support package placement available at the time of sourcing that safely meets the person's assessed needs, and that's subject to personal choice. So the operation of the above brokerage process may result in individual service contracts being awarded following the brokerage team approaching multiple providers on the list to establish the best value, best match. And as we've covered, all of that information and why we do that is covered within the brokerage process. So it was really just to reiterate that that is now a public document, and it details how we as a local authority commission packages of care. Next slide, please, Lauren. So an individual service contract. So an individual service contract is the contract that you will receive if you have a commissioned package of care whether from the home-based service, community-based service and supported living. So the individual service contract, or ISC, is what you will receive, and for those providers that we already work with, that covers the person's details, your details, and all relevant detail in relation to the support that's been sourced and the relevant rates that we will pay. So that's your ISC. Lauren, next slide, please. And then there's just a copy of the individual service contract. I'm sure a majority of providers are fully aware of what it looks like, but there's a copy there. And then we've got IPAs, so that's individual placement agreements. So that's the contract that we use when we're sourcing a care home placement. So your IPA is for all residential services, so that includes nursing care. If the council is commissioning that package, obviously we don't pay the nursing element, but the social care element would go on an individual placement agreement or an IPA. So within the contract, we just make reference to ISCs. So if there's any provider that's had a look through the agreement and there's no mention of IPAs, we still issue IPAs, but when we talk about ISCs in the contract and the agreement, we also mean IPAs. So they are still something that we will be issuing. And as we have done previously, it relates to care home placements. Next slide, please, Lauren. And again, there's a copy of an IPA, and it's probably something that quite a lot of providers have seen before. Because, as I've said, it's the contract that we issue for an individual placement. Next, please, Lauren. And then for those that are new, so we do have a 5-day rule, which was brought in for the authorisation of contracts. So when we issue an ISC or an IPA via the egress, the encrypted email system, then once we have issued that contract, so whether it be an ISC or an IPA, then you have as a provider, you have 5 working days to either accept or query the individual contract. And if you don't query the contract within those 5 days, then we act on the assumption that you are in agreement and you have agreed to work to the information contained within that contract. So you've got 5 days to query it and raise any queries that you may have in relation to the information on that contract. Otherwise, we make the assumption that you agreed and we will pay you based on the information within that contract. The 5-day rule's been in for a little while, but it's been formalised within the agreement. And next slide, please, Lauren. And I think this is Cal.
Stephen. So following on from the information Stephen's talked about in the previous slides on the contract, I just wanted to cover some of the key points around the payment processes. So once a contract, and whether that's an IPA or an IC, has been agreed for payment, the details are then passed through to the area finance admin teams and they'll be added onto your next available payment run. The standard North Yorkshire County Council arrangement is to pay 4 weeks in advance, and that will be based on the authorised contracts that are in place at the time of raising that payment. And your payments may also include adjustments from any previous payments where they've been, any adjustments have been agreed retrospectively. So those payments come out every 4 weeks. Each 4-week period, as well as a payment, you should also receive a separate documentation through secure email. And that will show the open contracts that we currently have in place. For residential and nursing service providers, the document would be the occupancy and activity return letter. And for non-residential services, it will be a copy of the electronic invoice. So once you receive those documents, they should be updated to reflect any changes in the actual care delivery that occurs throughout the 4-week period, and then return back to the area finance admin team as soon as possible after the period ends. That should be sent along with any other support and documentation that may have been requested. So the reason for this is that the area finance admin teams need that information from yourselves for a number of reasons. So it means that they are able to check any updates that you advise of, so any new contracts or changes in contracts, so they can make sure that they're showing within the system on the next payment run. It means that they can check for authorization of any additional care that's been delivered, so that future payments can be updated as quickly as possible. And it ensures that we can charge clients as accurately as possible in line with the service they've actually received as well. Okay, so on the next slide, please, Lauren. There are examples just to illustrate the parts of those documents that should be updated to inform of the changes. So what you can see is an excerpt there from the occupancy and activity return letter. So this is the one that the residential and nursing providers will receive. Each provider will receive one of these every 4 weeks, and it will show any open contracts that are in place. The grid you can see is included within the body of the letter, and typically the first 4 columns will be pre-populated with the person's name, reference number, their date of birth, and the start date. And we ask providers to update the remaining columns where relevant, particularly the end date and the discharge code, if there has been a change in the placement, and then send it back to ourselves. And whilst we can't see it on the screenshot on the slide, the discharge codes and the descriptions for those are included within each of the letters that are sent out. And then on the next slide, please, Lauren. This is a copy of the provider amendment tab, which is from the electronic invoice, which is used by non-residential providers. And I appreciate it probably looks really small on screen, but I think we can probably just about see the main areas. So at the very top, the first 5 or 6 rows will be populated with a provider detail, and will be updated to show which period that payment relates to. Below that, there are another 4 main sections of the form. So the first is the white section, where you can see, just got to make out all of the zeros at the left-hand side. That's the area where you would see all of the open contracts for that period, and it will include details of the person receiving the care, the contract number, contracted hours, and the cost. And then there are the 4 yellow blocks to the right. Each of those, they represent the 4 weeks of the payment period. These are the columns that you would need to update to show any amendments in the care delivered to a person throughout any of those weeks. You can update the cost, the hours, and there's a drop down to include a reason. This template is set up to assume contracted care is provided, so where there's no change in the care that's been delivered from contract, then the cells can just be left blank. Underneath that top section, there is a section with a blue heading. That's an area that you can add details of any new contracts that have started within the month, or if you've received a backdated contract, you could add in there the details of care that you delivered in previous months. Updating this area helps, as it ensures that the area finance admin teams are aware that a contract will be coming through. They can look out for that and include it in the next payment. The section below that, the one with the purple heading, that should be updated to show any packages of care that have ended during the period. That's really helpful information for us, so that as quickly as possible we can get that back from yourselves, and we can follow up on any contract terminations that we need to, and avoid overpayments, subsequent reclaims, and things like that. And then the very bottom section, you can just about see with the green heading, that's an area for amendments. It's mainly that'll be completed by the area finance admin teams, and it's used to add in any adjustments from previous payments. Periods. So if in a previous period you've advised that additional care has been authorised and delivered, this is where you would then see that payment showing on the next available payment run. So that covers those 2 returns, and that's the information that we would need back. I appreciate that probably a few people on the call will be familiar with those documents already, but where we have new providers, the area finance admin teams are happy to work with you through the initial setup and explain the process in more detail, work through any queries you've got. But for any providers, existing providers as well, if you need any help or support in completing those returns, just feel free to contact your local area finance admin team, and the contact details are included on the slide that you can see now.
I think we've reached the end, so we just we've obviously interspersed various teams' contact details throughout the slides, so the slides will be circulated after today's session, and by all means direct any individual queries that you've got to either Stephen's team, our team as the service development team, or as Carl has described it, as a particular queries in relation to sort of more training and support around the processing of payments, then Carl's team are really kind of willing and up for providing that additional support if it's needed. I think the next slide, Lauren, is just some additional resources. So providers on the call will probably be familiar with these already, because we have sort of been promoting them throughout the procurement. We've got the 2 dedicated North Yorkshire partnerships pages, which includes up-to-date information on the approved provider list, and then the FAQs that we've been running throughout the procurement. I would suggest we do something similar for the implementation. So we'll take this, Lauren will download the questions from today's chat and we'll turn that into a sort of a live FAQ document. Is there any leftover questions, Lauren? I have tried to answer quite a few as we've gone along.
Just a couple of quick ones to get through.
Okay.
If any more come through, I can email those through to you as well. So we've got one from Lisa just confirming when and how can she sign up to PAMS or providers.
You cut out then, Lauren. I didn't quite catch the
sorry.
No,
so when and how can we sign up onto PAMS?
Onto PAMS, yeah. So when we start to use PAMS, you'll get an email giving you a link to register, and then we will work, and there will be some additional webinars in relation to using PAMS, so that providers understand how it works and they've got a full training prior to us going live. And you'll get an email closer to the time, so it won't be until, it could be the back end of this year, or most probably is going to be the beginning of next year, but we'll share communication beforehand so providers are prepared to register. So yeah, probably the beginning of next year.
Brilliant, thank you. Just a quick one from Catherine. What notice on contracts do we expect from North Yorkshire County Council if we have to give 28 days notice on contracts?
In relation to a notice period that we as a local as a council have to give if we were to terminate, is that the
no, so if the provider's given 28 days notice, from what I can see on the question.
So from a point of view of notice period, you don't have to give a reason why you choose to give notice. It's 28 days dependent on the type of service being delivered. So within the residential and nursing home termination clauses, it's 28 days. Within your home-based and supported living and community-based, it's different notice periods dependent on the number of packages potentially you might have, or depending on the circumstances. So Lisa, if there's a particular query in relation to termination that you've got, if you email our generic email team, the email address or the social services.contracting unit will be able to give you a more detailed answer if I haven't answered your question.
Brilliant, thank you. I think last one is just whether you guys anticipate any payment delays with implementing the new systems during now to January.
I think we'll do everything possible to make sure the implementation of the new systems is as smooth as possible. And I think the whole purpose of us delaying the implementation of those new payment systems is to allow for testing, is to allow for training of providers. So we'll be running more detailed sessions with yourselves about how you will actively use those new systems to update us in a more timely and hopefully efficient way of the actual services you're delivering versus the contracted. I'm not going to promise that won't be without some teething issues, but I think we're committed as a local authority and the teams that are involved in that systems development work to making sure that we're confident with the new systems before we implement and go live with them, to mitigate against any of that. So that is part of the reason why we're not implementing those systems now, is to allow for that testing to happen and to mitigate against that, really. I don't know if Stephen or Carl, you want to come in on or add anything to that.
To echo that, Hannah, really, I think we're keeping existing processes in place between now and implementation. for that reason, because we know they work, and we want the time to do the testing to make sure that the new systems are up and running.
Thanks, Phil.
Well, thank you.
There has just been a couple of questions, and I've tried to answer them in the chat box, but I'm perhaps not articulating myself very clearly. So there's a few questions around direct care hours, and what I'm trying to say in my responses, but perhaps not doing so very clearly, is that the direct care hours, so residential and nursing care providers have been asked to submit us a weekly rate for their services, a standard weekly rate for the services that they deliver within residential and nursing care settings. That weekly rate, regardless of whether your rate is ACOC or above, should be for the direct care hours set out in the procurement documentation. Now, that applies for contracts that we commission from the 1st of November under the new APL contract. We can't apply those direct care hours to placements that we've commissioned under the current PPA. So it's only at the point that we commission a new placement with you under the new APL contract, or an existing placement, a person might have a reassessment, their needs might change, and at that point we will recommission the placement with you under the new contract. Only at that point does the new contract apply, and therefore the direct care hours apply. Hopefully that answers the question. I clearly wasn't making myself very clear in the chat, but I hope for those people that were asking that question, that clears that up. Thanks, Lauren.
Brilliant. Yeah, there is a couple of questions in there, but they are questions that have been covered previously. So do you want me to just send those over and get a response? I'll pop it in an email so everyone's got it on paper.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I think if we can cover the questions that we've answered today in that FAQ document, as well as anything that we've perhaps not got to, and then we can hopefully be as clear as possible.
Perfect. Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you all very much for your time, and I will have the recording over to you tomorrow morning, and also be shared, as I said at the beginning of the webinar, across Go for Growth social media.
Thanks, Lauren, and thanks everybody for making the time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.